All right, so Steve, we've got some correspondence coming back in now, so let's just start a new segment for our podcast here called We've Got Mail. Pick this one up from E3 Outfitters off of Apple Podcasts. He left us a nice review there, and I'll just read it. It says, I have learned a lot from your show. I like how you explain the topics and make a novice to a pro fit right in. The message of respect you send is spot on, and all us hunters being on the same page is where we need to be to protect all the things we are hunting. These guys are two you want at your campfire, sharing laughs and stories. If you ever find yourself in southern Michigan, look me up.
Hey, that's great, and that vision of that campfire chat is something that's very appealing to me for sure. Hey, Chris, we got one from Nicholas Brown. He lives down in Chatworth, Georgia.
Yeah.
And this came in through social media. He says, been listening to the podcast only this week and wanted to say that I'm really enjoying them. There's a lot of knowledge there, and I have a lot to learn. 22 years old, and I've been coon hunting for about 8 years, and have established my own line of dogs. Well, way to go, Nicholas. That's great. That I enjoy hunting. Love the podcast. Keep them up. Chris, this kind of feedback really gets us going and keeps us going. And we urge all our listeners out there to feedback to us either on Apple Podcasts or through social media, email, or whatever way. Let us know what you think about the podcast.
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. We don't know which direction to go if we don't know what our listeners want to hear. So sometimes no news is good news, but we do enjoy as you can tell, we enjoy talking to houndsmen, and neither one of us are shy about talking to people. So keep that stuff coming.
Absolutely.
Well, Steve, we picked up our title sponsor, W Hunting Supply, and you got any thoughts on W?
Well, yeah, Chris, summertime is right now, and it's a great time for us to gear up for the fall hunts that we're going to be enjoying this fall. And, there's nothing more frustrating than to have a hunt all planned out and discover that, there's something wrong with the equipment. It's not working right, or we forgot to replace an item that we knew that we're going to need when hunting seasons roll around. And usually we think of those things when there's no time to get it shipped to us. But Buddy and his staff at W have what I like to call a one-stop store, online store that you can, find virtually anything that you want on that one visit to dusupply.com. And I just can't say enough about them. I was browsing this morning and looking at the light section on W, and they carry the K-Light line of lights, and that happens to be the line of lights that I like to use. But whatever it is out there that you're looking for, you can find it at dusupply.com.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And like we've showcased before, it's like they live in a time machine because it seems to get here before you're done putting your order and confirming that order. I've had stuff show up here before it cleared my bank account before, so pretty good stuff.
Absolutely. dusupply.com.
This is a Houndsman XP podcast with your host, Steve Fielder, and me, Chris Powell. If you're ready to up your game to extreme performance, sit back, buckle up, and hang on for another exciting episode of Houndsman XP. Welcome to the Houndsman XP podcast. We have got a very great guest today. He's a man of many talents. The one, the only, the Ayatollah of rock and roll, Allen Gingerich of the United Kennel Club. So we've also got Steve on here. And Steve, how are you today?
Chris, I'm just awesome, man. I'm sitting down here in the sauna, 90s every day now, rain every afternoon, nice moist conditions. We're breeding mosquitoes by the millions. Gators are doing really well. The armadillo crop is up. I look for a great harvest this fall. So everything's great down here in the swamp.
I'll tell you what, you can pull some of that heat back down south with you. All you guys moved down there to Florida because you want this heat, but it seems like you keep sending it this way. We've been trying to work all week in this stuff, and it's really slowing crews down, I can tell you that.
Well, I would say this, but I would insult a lot of Hoosiers. It could be that, it sucks up there maybe. I don't know, and you're pulling everything up that way.
Man,
I don't know what's happening.
You won't get any argument from me. So, hey, let's just dive right into talking with Allen today. So, Allen, we'll get back to you. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Doing good this morning.
So, have you been listening to this mess we call a podcast?
Well, yeah, I have. I've listened to all of your episodes and really have enjoyed it. You guys are doing a great job with it. But, yeah, kind of like Steve's introduction there, I think mine could be almost the same, only I'm about 18 hours north and no gators. Other than that, it's about the same, I think, this morning.
Yeah, you guys sure do breed mosquitoes up there, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Actually, on that subject, I do recall the mosquitoes in Michigan being much worse than they are down here. I'm about 2 miles from the Gulf of Mexico here, so we get a breeze, and I think that helps. And we don't have a lot of standing water around where I'm here. But, man, I remember those summertime coon hunts in Michigan. I had a mesh ball cap on one time, one of the mesh-backed ones, and I put it over my face like a catcher's mask to try to keep the mosquitoes out. It was incredible.
And then the back of your head looked like you had smallpox.
Yeah, they do grow them big up here in the north.
For sure. Allen, I'm really happy that you're here with us today. I think you and I have a lot in common because we've basically sat in the same chair up there on Kilgore Road, and I had some really good times and good years with UKC. Love the organization, still do. Just really glad to have you. And you're a guy that people out there respect and like, and that's the kind of people that we're hopefully attracting to our podcast. And so I'm just really excited. I think we've got some notes that we want to try to go by today and to cover all the bases because, as Chris said, you do wear a lot of hats. You have a lot of talents. And some of the things that maybe our listeners don't know about you are the things that I'd like most to explore today.
Well, I can tell you that Allen came down and provided our entertainment at the Hoosier Tree Dog Alliance banquet one year. And we'd had different types of entertainment, but I really enjoyed Allen's. I mean, he just sat down at a microphone with a guitar, and it was great. And so that's why I introduced you the way I did, Allen. Your talents as a musician, I mean, they're awesome, and a lot of people wouldn't know that about you either.
Well, I don't know. You know what they say, kind of a jack of all trades and kind of a master of none is probably where I fit in somewhere. I don't know.
Well, Allen, tell us a little bit about your background. I know you grew up in northern Michigan, not the UP, but up there. Just kind of tell us a little bit about you and your days before coming to UKC. I knew you grew up around Alpena up there, didn't you?
Well, it was a little south of Alpena. Yeah, it was a little town called Mayo, right on the El Sable River, which is about, 70 miles south of the bridge, I think. Just about 30 miles northeast of Grayling is actually where I grew up. And, so I grew up on a small dairy farm up there, and and kind of had the oldest of a large family. But yeah, that's where I grew up at.
Well, I've been to Mayo one time, went up there on a hare hunt, and I remember it was 10 degrees out, bright sunny, and we had lunch out on the tailgate. There was no wind blowing. It was just an awesome day. The first time I saw one of those hares go across the lane there, taking looked to me like 20 feet jump ahead of the beagles. But it's a great part of the country up there. Tell us a little bit about what it was like to grow up in that part of the country.
Yeah, so I was actually still quite young when we moved up there. I was actually born here in Indiana, and my dad worked in the RV industry down here in Indiana or whatever. But I believe I was about 8 years old when we moved up there, and I can still remember the day we actually moved there, got there, and everything. Dad was, I believe, only 29 years old at the time, I guess. But yeah, so moved up there on this farm, and just some of the things that were so different from what I was used to. I remember going up there, like on a trip up there before we actually moved up there, and to me, it was a total different, as a little kid, it seemed like a total different world, to me from what I was used to. I saw pictures of bears everywhere up there, and I thought we were moving into bear country, but then 15 years later, I don't think I've ever seen a bear right there in Mayo. But no, some of the obviously the winters are kind of long and cold. Snow gets deep up there, and I remember one of the other things I first noticed one of the first days up there was a thumping sound I could hear coming from off in the distance, and didn't know anything about that, but grouse. So yeah, we had a lot of grouse. So obviously grew up chasing grouse and stuff like that. But yeah, so grew up on a farm up there. Dad did some logging for some loggers in the summertime. Dad had several horses or whatever. He'd take them in with just a single horse or whatever, and we'd go help him on Saturdays when we weren't in school. But yeah, just a lot of stuff like that is what we did, farm stuff. And then wintertime was more logging stuff, I guess. A lot of firewood to cut as a kid, that's for sure.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
No, I was just going to say my kids are still growing up that way, or they did. Most of them are adults now, but they've had their fill of firewood cutting.
Oh yeah. Every fall we'd have to fill up the basement. It usually took the basement full of firewood to get through the winter. So yeah, that was just part of our part of the makeup of growing up north was cutting firewood. Had all that was 1977, I believe, when we moved up there that year. So yeah. But yeah, just farm life up there. It was a good place to grow up, and had obviously living on the farm, there was always work to do, and even when your school friends are out shooting hoops and riding their bikes and stuff like that, there was hay to bale and all kinds of stuff like that around the farm. But yeah, I mentioned it's just northeast of Grayling. There's a military base there in Grayling, and in the summer times we'd be working the fields or whatever. But one of the things I always enjoyed was they did all their practice stuff out there, with their planes and all that, and it was neat to see some of that stuff.
I got you. Well, yeah, awesome. A kid would, I'm sure. Hey, well, when did the hounds enter the picture for you?
Well, my first I remember of any hounds was my grandfather in Indiana. He had a farm as well, but and that was at a very young age. Was out behind the barn. He had a horse barn. He was a horse breeder, and out behind his barn there, he had an acre, I don't know, approximately maybe an acre that was kind of fenced off for an exercise area for his mares that were on the urine line during the wintertime. But out there in that lot he had an old Walker hound tied up out there, named him Ace. And I remember as a young kid, I probably wasn't more than 3-4 years old, and that was first hound I ever remember, and I can still remember exactly what he looked like and what it smelled like to go out there too, where he was tied up, And, but I was just infatuated with that dog. So that was kind of my first introduction to dogs, or hounds, anyways. And then just my uncles, they're talking to them about it and everything, all the stories they had. I was just I was very interested in at some point, must have been in the fall of the year. Again, I was still pretty young, but I remember one day Mom and I were over there at Grandpa's, and they had got all these flashlights laying out and a bunch of gear. And I remember these long flashlights laying there, 3-4 of them. And obviously that piqued my interest. And I guess long story short, it was the first night of coon season, and I was very interested in everything about it. And I was very disappointed I couldn't go with them, but they had some hunting ground around right around his farm there, and I remember listening a little bit and heard that dog running back there, and I was just hooked. For some reason, it just really drew my attention. I could hear him from the house, and that was kind of my first thing that I remember of coon hunting, and then eventually, obviously, I got to go, and it kind of just it's kind of where it started. But as far as personally, my first dog I got when my brother and I got our first dog when we were, I'd say I was 12. I think we were like 10, 11, 12-ish, right in that time period, I guess. But we bought a little puppy, knew nothing other than what Grandpa told us, as far as training a puppy, and so we got this little female in Rose City, Michigan. I still remember driving over there and getting her, and I remember the guy had papers for her and everything. Heck, I didn't want to. We didn't even take the papers. We just wanted to coon hunt. We didn't need nothing else, So, anyways, we'd call Grandpa, and he kind of told us what we needed to do with this puppy as far as training goes, and I believe it was in March when we got this dog. And in that summer, we would go across we had property on both sides of the road we grew up on, and we had a big cornfield over there, and we'd lay drags like Grandpa told us to. Start off with laying the drag and hanging it up on a fence post, and graduated to a tree, eventually. And this dog would actually, I can't believe it, how lucky can you get, but this dog opened on trail, would tree on these fence posts, and eventually the trees there, alongside the one woodlot we had. And Steve, I cannot believe we did not ruin this puppy. It was, you talk about overkill. We did some extreme training. Two little boys that knew nothing other than following Grandpa's orders, but I remember then the first night of season, it happened. Here comes Grandma and Grandpa came up there, and I'm sure it was all planned. We just didn't know about it. It was kind of a surprise for us, and we had never even shown this dog a coon before the first night of kill season. Hadn't even seen a coon, just all off the scent that summer. And anyways, Grandpa and Dad, my brother and I, we went right across the road where we'd done all our training for so many days, and turned this dog loose, and she took off down through there, and it didn't take her long, and she struck a track, but this time she went out the opposite way, and the way we always took our drags, and it goes back there, I don't know, there's probably 400 or 500 yards before you get to the big woods on the back side of our property. There's one lone apple tree, and she treed that coon on that apple tree, and that was my first experience with the first dog we ever had. So you talk about a couple excited boys.
No kidding.
So.
That's
Yeah.
there's something to that, Allen. I want to take us back to the story about when you were standing there on the porch listening to that dog run and you couldn't go. How old were you then?
I was probably, Chris, I don't think I was probably more than 4 or 5 at the most.
Yeah. So
and what's interesting about that, later on in life here, obviously my brother and I hunted a lot up here in Indiana, and Grandpa's no longer alive now or whatever, but back there it was probably, I want to say he passed maybe 25 years ago now. But we still hunted his farm, my brother and I did. But he would always want us to come and make sure we'd wake him up or make sure he'd be up, and he'd sit on his porch and listen to our dogs run.
Isn't that cool?
You know,
Yeah.
It always was, and we tried to make that our first drop, early so he could, and obviously he was an old man by then, but it was kind of reversed like that. I always kind of thought about that. We tried to kind of go out of our way to make that our first drop and make sure Grandpa could listen to it. He was kind of like we were, he was a coon hunter and loved his dogs. Yeah.
Well, Alan, your story reminds, excuse me, Chris, but your story reminds me so much of my dad's story, growing up on a farm in Middle Tennessee, sleeping upstairs with his older brother Phil in the feather bed, and listening to the neighbor's old coonhound, a fellow named Washwork, hound, trail up the river. And my dad told me he was just a little guy, and they would sit there or lay there in bed and listen to that dog, and that's what created that desire. And then finally, his folks would let them take the lantern with a dog of their own, my grandpa's old cur dog, and walk down the creek. But they had to stay where the folks could see the lantern light from the house, But anyway, it's your story is probably resonating with a lot of people that are listening to this podcast of how, but they say it's inborn, this love of the hounds. But I think probably it's more taught at a very young age by our families than any other way. But it's a great story. Story.
Yeah.
And to relate, just let me jump in here real quick, Alan. Just kind of add credibility to this. I remember when I was a young kid like that, I didn't grow up with hounds in my immediate household, but my uncle had hounds. And we would go out there different times, and I can tell you that if you went out there for Sunday dinner and when it got dark, you better not be parked behind him because he was leaving to go coon hunting. And I remember being out there, and a lot of times we would leave after he would go or while he was loading up. But it always intrigued me. I always enjoyed watching him load those hounds, and he would do something similar if we stayed around. I remember one night we were sitting out on the porch of this big farmhouse, and he went right down the road. It probably wasn't a quarter mile down the road, and dropped those hounds out. And I sat out there and I listened to him strike a track and tree that raccoons, and you could see their lights down there, and it just intrigued me as a young kid. I was probably 9 or 10 years old when that started happening, and I think there's something to that specific act of no, you can't go now, and making these kids want to do that sort of stuff, letting their imaginations run with them and things like that. You see a lot of things on social media about these guys packing their 3 and 4 year old kids out there and making them sit in a blind and giving them an iPad and all that stuff. They really haven't got they haven't developed their own desire to do that sort of thing. So I think there's a common thread there for our serious houndsmen out there that had this innate or instinctive desire to be involved, and I think there's something to making a kid sit back and wait and develop their own desire to be involved.
Yeah, I think I think you're spot on with that, Chris. Either you're it's something that's kind of in your blood, or it isn't, however it gets there, but yeah, you're spot on. It's like Grandpa was kind of a hero to me. My dad hunted some, but he always had a beagle around, and so he rabbit hunted some and did some bird hunting, but he wasn't a hunter like Grandpa was. Now I say a hunter, that's Grandpa deer hunted and stuff like that too, or things like that, but yeah, it was his coonhound that really infatuated me as a youngster, and I remember going out there a lot of times, just go out there and how little kids do, just kind of pet over old Ace and everything. And But yeah, Grandpa he was kind of a horse breeder too. He had a lot of horses around there. So that's kind of also where my love for horses kind of started as well. So yeah, I could say Grandpa was kind of a hero. But one other point I'd make is that was kind of interesting, I guess. Mom told me one time later in life that when we were still boys or whatever, that she asked Grandpa one time, or she told Grandpa, her dad, that every chance we get, all we want to do is just hunt, and she worries about us sometimes. We just take off and go, and she said, well, her dad, Grandpa, told her that it's in their blood and they could be doing a lot worse. He told her to let them go. They know what they're doing.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
Well,
that's great.
Alan, you talk about we, and I assume that you're talking about your brother Paul. Is that correct?
I am. My brother, I was the oldest and Paul was the second oldest. He's about a year and a half older than I am. And, him and I did everything together growing up. Like I mentioned, we went in and bought that first pup together, and we have done everything together, and kind of like a lot of brothers probably went on a lot of hunting trips, and even in the as we got older, he got married and everything else and all that. And probably since I've been working at UKC, that kind of has diminished a lot. We don't hunt together nearly as much anymore as we used to, but yeah, up until then, it was like he was my hunting partner and I was his, and a lot of things like that, So yeah.
Well, you and Paul together got interested in the Redbone breed, did you not?
Yeah, we did. And I'd say a lot of that had to do with the first pup that we got was, in fact, a Redbone, that Redbone female, and we just liked her. And really, I'd say, looking back now, we were really lucky to have a pup like that turned out the way it did, and we didn't ruin it, with our training resume there. But yeah, so that's, and we just kind of stuck with it. I know after school and everything, there was a couple of years there where I kind of got interested in probably some things I shouldn't have or whatever, that I didn't have a dog around, and that was after I moved back to Indiana. Kind of got to playing a little bit of music and things like that or whatever. So there's about 2-3 years there where I didn't hunt that much, but kind of figured out the whole music thing, and that wasn't going to work out, and needed to do something else and to make a living and everything else. So, but here I go right back to dogs again, and then rest is history, I guess.
Well, tell us a little bit about that music background. Chris has talked about you playing. I've walked around at Autumn Oaks after all the casts are out and walk around through the campsites, and I'm as apt as not to see you there with some guys gathered around with your guitar and all. And that's something that I enjoyed doing a lot myself when I was a young guy. I kind of grew up, well, my dad was from Tennessee near Nashville, and he played fiddle, but I didn't have that kind of talent. My brother's a musician, but I learned to play chords on a guitar and kind of grew up in that coffee house age and those protest songs and that sort of thing when I was in college. Michael row the boat ashore, and if I had a hammer, and that kind of thing. But you've taken it certainly farther than I did. Tell us a little bit about that music.
Well, I probably didn't take it much further than you did. My first experience was after school and everything. I moved back to Indiana and took a job in the RV industry or whatever. But that's when I first got my first guitar, which was, I was probably I don't know, late teens, I guess, and kind of took it up then. And actually my brother kind of followed me down here after school and did the same thing. So there again, he also took interest in it, and we thought we were going to get a band together, and we got our guitars and everything else. We were going to learn all these songs, and here in the next 3-4 months we were going to get us some gigs. Well, that's not the way it works, but anyways, eventually we did hook up with some guys and played in a couple bands just around the local area here, and Yeah, it was a lot of fun, but I never got into much of the technical stuff. You know, it was at the first band I ever got into, I was the rhythm player in the band. So I never got into a whole lot of leads and a lot of fancy stuff and a lot of advanced things. So I never really did, you know. And then after about the mid 90s, I guess, kind of laid that up as far as playing in bands, and you know, had obviously got back into hunting, and it's kind of, you know, started competition hunting during that time a little bit as well. So I finally kind of figured out I'm gonna quit this band stuff that we're not getting anywhere with, and get kind of do more hunting again, I guess. But so to kind of sum it up, I guess what I'm saying, I'm more of a open guitar chord kind of wannabe kind of guitar picker, I guess you would say. I'm not very good, but I love to sit around and play with people and things like that. So yeah, that's about the extent of it anymore.
Well, I think, you know, when my son was 8 years old, he came to me and he said, "Dad, show me how to play the guitar." So I showed him an E chord. All right. That was pretty simple. Yeah. And before I knew it, he was asking me to take him downtown to a guy that was teaching lessons and all. And this kid just took it and ran with it, you know. And just, of course, he grew up during those Pearl Jam garage band days, and his bedroom often sounded like somebody cutting up beer cans with a chainsaw, you know. But anyway, and his teachers told me, he said, one teacher told me, "You better cut the strings on that guitar. That's going to lead to no good." But he didn't. He kept it on the hobby level and all. And but yeah, it can be a lot of fun.
You mentioned young kids, you know, and you're right. It seems like the younger kids, they take up something like that, they can just learn so much quicker than I could when I started, I guess. But my brother's oldest boy is a good example of that. He basically was born into it, you know. Around the house, we were always playing music, and I showed him his first chords when I remember it on Thanksgiving Day, when he was 7. And he had a little guitar he'd beat and bang around with a little before then, but I actually showed him his first chords then. And, you know, it didn't take him long. When he was 9, I think, he played at some wedding reception we played. He sat in with us and played. And shoot, today he blows me away. You know, we have a hard time getting him to come play with us if we want him to sit in as a group, you know, especially out somewhere. You know, he's kind of way past that now, but yeah, it's all good. But, yeah.
Well, you know, Alan, I'm looking back, I think the first time you and I met was at a rabbit hunt. I'm thinking it was at Albion, Indiana. I could be wrong on that, but it was back when we started the hunting beagle program with UKC, I believe. Do you remember anything about that?
I do vaguely, and I think you're right. I think that is probably where we first met there at the old Albion Club, and I didn't live too far from there, but yeah, I used to go up there to their trials all the time.
Yeah. Well, what about the hare hunting up there in northern Michigan? You go back up there and do that, don't you?
We do, yeah. So we grew up with it, and we had both cottontails and snowshoe hare up there in Mayo where we were at. It was about half and half, kind of depended where we go, but yeah, we would hunt both as kids, but there was just something about the hare hunting that was always, we loved it when our dogs got on a hare. You know, it was just I like cottontails too, but there's just something about the way a hare just runs a little different, you know, and they take them out a lot further, and it's a little more excitement. You know, you always have that every time you go up there, first track you get on when you're not used to it, you think the dogs might be running a deer or something. You know, they just kind of blow out in a straight line, maybe kind of like a deer would, but go out of hearing, you know, and you just kind of wait and hope it's right, you know, and eventually you hear them coming again, you know. But you can put on some miles in a hurry hare hunting, or the dogs do.
You know, up there, it's like in those, I guess, is that cedar swamp area in there?
It is. There's some of that, and that's kind of where we had to go. Places like that is where we would hit hare up there. But there's quite a few places like that. But now since then, we still there's 6 of us boys in my family, and 5 of us hunt. There's one of the boys, second to the youngest, that never really took up hunting for some reason, but all of the rest of us did. My brother Paul and I, we mostly coon hunted, and obviously did a bunch of rabbit hunting as well. But the other 3 brothers, they don't coon hunt, but they just rabbit hunt. So, but yeah, still every year it's kind of a tradition for us boys to all go up north, and generally we'll kind of start around Mayo one day there, and just kind of for old time's sake, I guess, our old stomping grounds. And it's always neat to go back there to some of those same old places we used to hunt, and but then usually we gravitate up to the UP where you get into the really good hare hunting. So yeah, it's always a trip. I look forward to it, and we just love it.
Do you keep beagles yourself, Alan, or do you?
Yeah, I do. You know what? Like I said, Dad had beagles at home. The only times for me, that I was not around beagles was probably those couple of years, I mentioned when we were kind of doing everything else, but, or doing a lot of things we shouldn't have been doing, but, they're in our late teens and early 20s or whatever. So there was a span of about 3 years, maybe 2-3 years where I didn't have a beagle, but, ever since then, I've always had a pack of beagles. Yeah. And I've got, I don't have many out here. I've got to keep about 3 or 4. I got 4 out here now, I guess. So, yeah.
Well, that's, I always enjoyed the beagles. When we started the hunting beagle program, and you probably have the numbers there. I don't remember exactly the year, but I got a couple of dogs and used to enjoy running them every day after work there at UKC, and enjoyed that a lot. You actually ran that hunting beagle program for quite a few years, didn't you?
I did. Todd Morgan was up there running it when I first started up there, and then he quit at UKC. I think it was 2008, I think. And so I kind of took it over there to begin with. It was just supposed to be until we got somebody else to replace him, and we eventually did. And that individual was there for, I don't know, maybe only a year and a half. So then it kind of comes back in my lap, the UKC Beagle programs. So I did it again there until here recently we had another Beagle guy, and he's not there anymore either. So I don't know why we can't keep a Beagle.
You guys
guy
are
around,
tough on guys up there, apparently.
No, makes me look kind of bad. But anyways, I've been kind of involved really since 2008 in some form, and but it's kind of, for me, I used to trial quite a bit, and most of it was back in the mid 90s, and I was actually it was after the whole music thing. I just did nothing but hunt, Steve, and pretty religiously. Hunted, coon hunted, and I'm talking about competitions, and same with the beagle trials. Did it for about 2 years, and I wore myself out. Finally, I said, you know what, I need to do one or the other, and put more emphasis on one or the other instead of just I couldn't run the dogs enough. There's a lot of times I'd go to a night hunt on a Friday night and be up and, at 4 o'clock in the morning going to a beagle trial. A lot of times their deadlines are 6, 7 in the morning, and a lot of times without sleep. And finally, after a couple of years of that, I thought I'm probably overdoing it a little bit. But you know what it was? A lot of it was just ate up with it, love it, and still do. I absolutely love those beagle trials too.
Well, I think we all are that way, Alan, but there's a thing called age that comes into play. I know I was that way too. I couldn't get enough of it. With us back in West Virginia, it was bear hunting and coon hunting, and trying to mix the two, and that was an exercise in futility at times. But
yeah. So
well,
did you ever go up there hare hunt in the UP at all, or no?
I didn't go to the UP. I did go up and hunt with Joe and Nancy Hudson on bear and also on bobcats. But
Oh yeah.
anyway, but no, I didn't get to the UP for hare, but I'm sure it would be great up there. I think Chris wants to jump in here, Alan.
Yeah,
Sure.
Alan, do you have a memorable hunt that stands out in your mind? Anything on hunting hares or hunting rabbits? Any particular story that, or is it just kind of an overall euphoria about your memories of hunting hare and rabbits in Upper Michigan?
Yeah, so I don't know that I really have any particular one that really stands out to me a whole lot. Last year was one that we kind of had a unique situation. A friend of mine went up on a separate trip, and we stopped there in Mayo and hunted for a Saturday, and then we went on up to the UP and hunted a little bit on Sunday morning or a Sunday afternoon, I guess it was. But and one of my other brothers was coming up with some other guys on that trip, and we were to meet with them up there in the UP. But I remember about that was on a Monday, then a Tuesday, and we were just running. Running was just awesome last year again. And about the second day, we'd put a bunch of miles on our dogs already, the dogs that we had, and just wanted to make sure they get all their dogs run. Everybody brings a bunch of dogs. We've got, I don't know, 10, 12 dogs up there, or they do,
Yeah.
and we've got 6 or 8 of them. So we went a couple miles or a mile and a half down the road. My buddy and I did, like on a Tuesday morning, and we cut out. And the thing that I've just not heard it up there, being a mile and a half away, we thought we were far enough away. Well, we cut our pack loose, and before we know it, it's kind of surprising we're not getting a strike yet. And look at our Garmins here; we've got a couple dogs going to theirs. But the point I'm making, what was interesting was eventually we moved on down the road, grabbed up the rest of our pack and moved on down the road further. But we could hear our dog on that morning for 1.7 miles. We could hear a beagle, and the only way we could, because we had a collar on our beagles that were running with their pack. But it was just so still up there that you could hear beagles running that far away, 1.7 miles. And
That's crazy.
It kind of stuck to me. And then we made another trip up there later. Now that was in October before the snow was on. So in November, I think it was around Thanksgiving time, went up there again, and everything's snow covered. But just the difference was, we could hear the dogs as well as at 1.7 miles before the snow was on as we could in November when it was on at 500 yards.
Yeah.
But it's just amazing how that snow just really makes a difference like that.
I was going to ask you how the snow changes, the hare hunting and the rabbit hunting up there.
Yeah, well, it's fun to hunt on snow, and that's what we normally did. It's hunted on snow, and matter of fact, last year, and I've hunted a couple times before the snow came on, but the hare a little bit, in that transition between turning colors, they obviously turn white in the wintertime or whatever. And sometimes in that transition, they get a little spookier, but once they're all white, they think that nobody can see them or whatever, but they're just fun to hunt. Another thing that's changed over the years a lot is, obviously now we hunt with Garmins and everything. And that's almost like cheating up there with when it comes to hunting hare. You basically got a line coming at you or whatever, and they're kind of predictable, really. You just see where they're going to come across, and you can kind of set up pretty easily. But generally, what we do up there, it's like most anything else. You guys can probably relate. A lot of times it's not about the game or harvesting the game so much as listening to the dogs work, watching the dogs work, and things like that. So generally what we do, we just set up a camp, have a campfire there, and sit around and cooking stuff, and this and that or whatever. And every couple of the dogs will run a hare for a couple hours, and somebody will get up and, wait for it to come across the road. That's kind of how we hunt up there on those trips. So
that sounds like my kind of hunt right there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, listen, you also live in some of the best coon hunting in the world. Describe for our listeners a little bit what the coon hunting's like there in southern Michigan, northern Indiana, Allen.
Yeah, it's you hear it a lot, where people think they have the best coon hunting in the world, or anywhere, and I would probably say the same thing. There's places I've been that I would say are probably even better. I say better. It depends on what your definition of the word better is as it relates to the topic, I guess. But yeah, we've got a good coon population here in northern Indiana, southern Michigan, and it's you hear. I know a lot of guys. I have a lot of friends that think it's a great place to start young dogs, but it's good, but it can also be tough. Steve, you can probably attest to that. It's not every night is just easy hunting, or sometimes when the difference is, I think around here is sometimes when the coons aren't moving, they just flat aren't moving.
Right.
But then there's other nights when you can tree a lot of coon. Probably one of the hunts that sticks out to me in terms of treeing a lot of coons was 25, 30 years ago. It was old Mike Colder, who's since passed. He was from the Columbia City Club.
Remember him well. Yeah.
Yeah, good guy. Mike was kind of one of those guys that took my brother and I under their wing at the Columbia City Club when we first joined, and we were kind of outcast a little bit. We were hunting red dogs, and this was predominantly treeing walkers around the area, a few blue ticks, I guess. But yeah, so Mike and I hunted together a lot. But anyways, him, Larry Smith, and his brother Sonny and I went out on the last day of season. It was one of those nights where you would think probably wasn't gonna be that good. It started snowing a little bit early in the evening, and just a still night, but it was snowing, and it snowed all night. Not hard, but just and it was the best night of coon hunting I have ever witnessed. That night we made 32 trees and harvested that many coon on the last night of season, and left some doubles up there. I think all in total we saw a total of 37 coons that night. Now we hunted from dark to daylight that night, but just couldn't quit.
Yeah, when it's that good, you don't want to go home.
The day before, yeah, I guess the season would have ended that next noon or whatever. So, yeah. One of the last.
And
last night.
That's unusual to get that kind of hunt in northern Indiana because of the lake effect snow. And how much snow was on the ground when you left that evening?
It was not much, just barely, just barely covered. But it was just one of those nights. But obviously, that's not typical here, but it's generally, depends how long you hunt or whatever, but yeah, it's a good place, but generally it's not that uncommon to tree at least 4 or 5 coon.
One of the things that a lot of people don't consider about that country up there is the amount of swamp and water and just wet areas, and it's a pretty diverse area. Yeah, it's flat for the most part when you compare it to Rocky Mountains or the Appalachians or even southern Indiana, but it's got its own challenges with weather and also with the amount of wetlands and things in northern Indiana and southern Michigan there. I don't think a lot of people even realize how much water's there, and that can pose a lot of problems for young dogs and things like that.
Yeah. Absolutely, and I think you're spot on. You're exactly right, because you can get in a lot of swamps where it can get pretty ugly, in places you don't want to be. But yeah, I know there's several places there where I try to stay out of, because of that very thing. But yeah, it's not all what do they say, peaches and ice cream, I guess.
Boy, that's for
golf course.
That's for sure. I remember one night being back in a swamp, and if I didn't have Garmin's back then. In fact, I probably didn't even have a telemetry system at that time. I had a compass, and if it hadn't been for that, and I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. The fog was so thick, and I'd gotten back in this what we called hellhole, and I'm in muck up to my knees. It's trying to suck my frog leg waders off every step. And so it's not all golf course hunting for sure. But another aspect of that, Alan, I think you'll agree, is with that number of coon in some places, takes a tree dog. It takes an accurate tree dog, a dog that once he gets treed, he'll stay treed, because there's always another track to run when you're hunting that type of territory. At least when I was hunting those years, I was there for 22 years, and I needed a dog that was accurate but would stay treed and not check too much.
Yeah, that's very true, and that's you always have the debate of north versus south. A dog from down there doesn't do well here, and vice versa, this and that. But yeah, it takes you're exactly right. There's tracks out there to be run or whatever, and you need a dog to stick with that track and get it done, not kind of see it a lot, dogs that aren't used to maybe as many coons or whatever, that they struggle a little bit with that part of it. But yeah, that's very true. Talking about swamps, it seems like every fall, I have people come up, want to go hunting or whatever, and in Michigan or whatever, there's the Lindell Price, which you guys know well. He comes up quite a bit about every year. Alger Morgan was another guy from Tennessee that used to come up and hunt with us a lot up there in southern Michigan. I don't know if you guys know Alger. He was a Redbone guy there from Tennessee.
Sure.
Had the Smoky Mountain Brandy dog. Always enjoyed hunting with him. And he used to come up there and hunt with us every year. But I forget who it was. It was one of those guys. I think one night I got back into the Fulton Game Reserve. There's a part of that reserve that is good to hunt, but it also has one of those swamps you want to stay out of. And one of those nights I got one, I don't remember which one it was, but I got one of those guys back in there, the make a couple trees back in there and keep turning loose. And the last time we turned loose, we probably shouldn't have, kind of get a dog through there. And I had them guys back there in that swamp for about 3 hours before we could get out. So it's yeah.
Oh, yeah. Remember those times.
Back in there.
Hey, Alan, you just you got to finish up that thought.
Yeah, there's what I hunted. I know Steve lived up there too, and I think Steve hunted some on the west of the highway, west of 131. I never hunted that area much over there. Most of what I hunted there or hunt there in southern Michigan is east of the highway. I'm talking of 131 there, towards like Vicksburg, Colon, Fulton, Scotts, in that area, and that is just it doesn't get much better than that. Some of that farm country over there is just outstanding for coon hunting.
It's amazing. It's amazing area up there.
No question. Yeah. I hunted more high ground over west around the grape vineyards and the high woods, right. And we had a few potholes over there. When I would go over to Fulton to hunt with Bruce Loker or Ben Smith and Steve Irons, those guys around Athens and that area, had some phenomenal hunts over in the area you hunted or hunt, Alan. But most of mine was a lot more like that golf course hunting we talked about.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Bruce Loker. Bruce is not doing well, but I used to hunt Bruce's farms, and he obviously grew up there in that area, and he hunted every nook and cranny around there. So it was always fun to go hunt with Bruce.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. That would be a whole podcast just telling Bruce Loker stories.
Oh yeah, you're not going to do much walking with him. He knows how to drive to every tree. Seems like it doesn't matter if it's his farm or not. Heck, he would turn loose in the cemetery right behind town
there. Good roads.
Yeah. Well,
you get right in there. So
yeah, he just had that knack. He didn't want to do much walking. He'd always drive, and even if it took a lot longer to get there, he always wanted to drive and get as close as you could. But yeah.
That's Bruce. When I hunted with Jimmy Phillips down in southern Georgia, We hunted some of those huge plantations down there, and Jimmy was the same way. And we're getting ready to take off to these dogs. They weren't 100 yards through there, and we were hunting the Southern Heritage Plantation down there. It's bigger than the county I live in, and we're sitting there and we're listening to our dogs treat right there, and the guy I went with and I were standing there listening to these dogs, and we just, well, let's go. We flip on our lights, and Jimmy says, "Where are you going?" So we're going to those dogs. They're not 150 yards. He goes, "Did you come down here to coon hunt, or did you come down here to wade swamps?" He'd drive you all the way around that. He'd drive you across the levee. He'd pull right up, and those dogs would be 20, 30 feet off the side of this improved road down there, and you walk right to them. And so, yeah, I understand that mentality. Jimmy Phillips was the same way.
Yeah.
Hey, Alan, let's shift gears a little bit. You just got back from a bear hunt in Idaho, is that right?
Yeah, I did. Just last week we were out there hunted the whole week out there. But yeah,
was that a draw tag or I'm sorry, not a draw tag, but a guided bear hunt, or did you go out there and do that on your own?
No, it was a guided hunt. Got introduced to Bud Martin out there, who has he's like a fourth generation outfitter out west there. He has a camp in Montana, and then his bear camp is there in Idaho, just south of the Lolo Pass there in that national forest right there.
Sure.
On the Idaho side, and it was. Yeah, that trip rates at the top of my list for hunting trips I've ever taken. It was just amazing. I've been out west before, in Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, but and those, I just love going to places like that, and those places are beautiful. But I'm telling you, we flew into Missoula, Montana.
I bet that. Is that the first time you've flown into Missoula?
It is. It's just.
What'd you think of flying into Missoula?
It's awesome. I took a little bit of video coverage flying in, and just looking at the landscape around there, is just. It's just amazing. This was last week, so the middle of June. There's still snow on top of the mountains and everything. It was just amazing, and we get out there. We flew in on a Saturday and get out and spend Sunday there before we went to camp on Monday morning. But everything around there is just so awesome. Did a lot of driving around, and but then we went up, to go hunting on Monday up Highway 12 there, which I guess is kind of known as the Lewis and Clark Highway there. Up into the Lolo Pass, and it just got better and better. I don't know. There's something about, I've always been loved growing up north, in the UP, and just kind of the way the terrain is and everything up there. It reminds you a little bit of that, I guess, but not. It's just so much, so vast, and just all the mountain range. It's in the Bitterroot Mountain Range, but I have just never seen anything like that. It was loved it. It was just an amazing trip.
Yeah, and you can't describe it. Was that a spot and stalk hunt, or was that a hound hunt?
No, they do have, this outfitter does offer both. Most of them is on bait sites or whatever, but he does offer the hunting with hounds. And I tell you where it first started is my stepson here several years ago. His older sister graduated high school. We had a graduation party out here at the house and everything. And after that, he told me, he said, when I graduate, I think instead of having a party, I think I'd rather go on a hunt or something, like a bear hunt or something. You think that would be possible? And I said, you know what? I'll try to make that happen. So 4 years later, here we are. That happened last week, and it was for him and I. We were green as grass when it comes to bear hunting. Matter of fact, I have never bear hunted before. So it was a great experience for the both of us, and he absolutely loved it as well. But no, it was this one was on bait sites. Nice. And we kind of hit the tail end of the season, obviously, when we were up there. But yeah, it was out in no cell phone service, very primitive, and just out there in the wilderness like that was just. And even him and I on the way back in, get on top of the Lolo Pass, and you go back into the south. I want to say it's, I don't know, 16, 20 miles back in there where his bear camp is set up. Just so many times that we stopped along the way, just get out and just look around, take pictures, and it's just magnificent country, you know, and it's that was an amazing week. It really was.
Well, if you feel like you need to get addicted to bear hunting, you need to tune in. There's another podcast you need to know about, and that's the Bear Hunting Magazine podcast with Clay Newcomb.
I do listen to that some. Yeah, yep.
That's a great podcast, and Clay does a good job of really digging down into bear hunting, and they have a good magazine too. They've got a lot of hound content,
right,
in the magazine as well. So. It'd be good listening for somebody that's looking at getting into bear hunting. So they talk about bait and spot and stalk and hound hunting, all kinds of things, anything that's got to do with bear hunting, even predator calling bears. So that's a good opportunity for people that want to listen to a lot more bear hunting content. One of the things they're going through out there right now in that country is a couple of the eco-terrorist environmental groups out there trying to stop baiting on national forest. So that's something that houndsmen need to be paying special attention to on that, and staying tuned in to. I just got a message from Steven, distracted me a little bit, but sorry.
You got to learn to multitask here.
Man, I'm telling you what, my brain's not working this morning, that's for sure. But anyway, Western Bear Foundation is really plugged into that. So if you want more information on that, make sure you check out the Western Bear Foundation and also listen to the Bear Hunting Magazine podcast. Steve, that message was important.
Well, absolutely. And in fact, you don't really, I bear hunted for many years over in West Virginia or in Virginia, and really got to hunt out west in Arizona and New Mexico. And bear hunting with hounds is fun, but bear hunting of any kind is exciting. It's just over the top fun. And glad you had a good trip out there, Allen, a good time to spend with the boy. And I'm sure that was all really a great experience. Hey, listen, Guy, you and I have kind of taken similar paths in life. And that, of course, would be with our employment with the United Kennel Club. I know with me, it started out with the Plot Association and meeting Fred Miller at Plot Days, and later becoming a breed rep and going to Kalamazoo for the meetings, and then getting invited to be a field rep. And one thing led to the other, and I went there full time in 1983. How did all that happen for you?
Yeah, so I guess it was the summer of 2004. I was kind of like you. I was involved in a breed association. Again, it was a Redbone Breed Association. I was the acting vice president, but I was also the hunt director. So I was kind of in charge of putting on the hunt, and it happened to be in LaGrange, Indiana. And that's where Todd Kellum first approached me asked me about it. And quite frankly, I just kind of laughed it off a little bit. I've been as far as employment or work goes, I've been in the RV industry for a good number of years, about 15 years by that time, I guess. And just kind of laughed it off a little bit. But I did think, it may be something I would enjoy doing. I'm thinking, man, just, hunting and have a job that you like for, that involves things you're interested in to begin with, but anyways, we didn't talk a whole lot about it there, I guess, but he called me, I don't know, a month or so later, and then is when I really figured out that he was pretty serious about it. And so that's kind of how it got started there, and several more phone calls or whatever, and turns out, I think it was November of 2004 is when I actually first started working up there. But yeah, it's kind of how that came about, I guess.
Well, that's kind of how things happen with me too, and I think a lot of people, and I think you can relate to this when we go out to the events and we see people and everybody says, man, you got the dream job, I mean, all you got to do is sit around and talk to coon hunters all day. And when it gets dark, you can pick any of the great dogs that are on the grounds and you can go out and watch them go and all, you're living in Disney World,
Yeah.
But what they failed.
I know where you're going. I know where you're going.
But I think what they fail to recognize is there's a Monday morning attached to all that. And that's when things can indeed get interesting. What's a typical day like at the Kennel Club for those who can't imagine what the job's like?
Yeah, well, yeah, you're exactly right. I think I had some of those same thoughts, and I was just going to add to that where I thought you was going. You'd think you'd get to hunt even more, and I think it's been just the opposite,
Right.
But, as it kind of the way it kind of works out. But no, I live in Indiana here. It's right on the Michigan-Indiana line, so I have about a 45 to 50 minute commute to work every day. So and it's a little bit of a drive. It's just straight up 131 to 94, and you're there. It's good roads, I guess. But so I don't know. For me, that little commute I actually kind of like it in a way because it gets on your drive up to work. It gives you some time to think and about the day's priorities, what's on the docket, so to speak, I guess, and your priorities
and you get to listen to Houndsman XP podcast.
Well, that is the only problem with that. I listen to that on Monday night coming home, and I finish it up on Tuesday morning going there again. Kind of how that works. But yeah, so the phones don't come on obviously till 9 in the morning, so it gives you time to catch up on emails and things like that. But yeah, Steve, you're right. Mondays you get a lot of those, and that's the highest volume of phone calls we get is on a Monday. Mondays and Fridays, but I'd say Mondays is pretty. Mondays and Fridays are about the same, I guess. But yeah, it's those. This happened last weekend at the hunt type calls, rules questions. But I've always loved rules discussions, and I still do, and I never get tired of them or anything. So I always like those, to be honest. Obviously there's situations that happen that you got to deal with this and that or whatever. It's some of those, but you kind of learn to not get too frustrated or too discouraged, I guess, sometimes with some of the things that unfortunately you got to deal with. But yeah, that rule stuff, and Steve, I'm sure you can relate. You answer the same questions hundreds of times, but it's all good, and I enjoy it.
As long as you're not answering them 100 different ways, Alan.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you know what? That's a good point you make. Because people remember what you told them here, and that's something you want to know what you're talking about, and be consistent. So
I can relate a little bit to that. With my employment as a conservation officer for all those years, you get the same questions over and over, and I can guarantee you that if you're not on your A game, then it will come back to haunt you because they will remember exactly what you told them about it particularly. Absolutely. So I understand. And a lot of times you kind of catch some grief because, you kind of you've just got to tell people what the rule says. You can't interpret it for them. You can't, in my business, we just said, here's the law, here's what it says, and try to explain them the different caveats in the law, but don't editorialize on it because that will definitely come back and haunt you.
Well, one of the go ahead, Alan. I've got a
no go ahead.
No, I just think back to those Saturday mornings, for instance. Let's say it was Autumn Oaks or maybe at the Winter Classic or any breed days, and a fellow comes up and tells you his story about his cast the night before, and reply that served me well for many years, and I don't know whether you agree or not, but I would always tell them, well, if the situation happened exactly the way you say, without any argument, then
Bingo.
this is
Bingo.
the way I would rule on that. This is the way it should have been handled. However, there are many sides to the story, I'm sure, and I haven't talked to anybody else in your cast. So we'll wait until we talk to them and we'll see and try to get the big picture. But if it happened exactly the way you say, then I would do thus and so. And that always served me pretty well over the years.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I can relate to that exactly. And you could. And that's one of the things you kind of learn I learned pretty quickly. You got to be very careful that you don't, that you make it very clear like that, because there's oftentimes, and I was a master hound, served as a master hound, so I kind of dealt with those questions and putting on hunts, obviously, before I worked up there. But yeah, before you can come to a conclusion, it's you're better served to make sure you've got all the information you need to make the right ruling, because you know how it is. You have one person calling, and not everybody's like that, but oftentimes you don't want to get caught with there's that one little factor that is a difference maker. So yeah, you're exactly right, and the way you tell them, is good advice, and that's usually the way I kind of work it as well, But and sometimes it's you can talk to 4 people on the cast, and none of them can agree exactly what happened, But
right.
It's like the old party game, where you tell a story and you whisper it down the line until you get to the end. And you get a completely different story. Well, listen, but I want to interject right here for some of our big game hunters and perhaps deer doggers and rabbit hunters and all that might be lost balls in high weeds and all this talk about night hunting and competition. They're just fundamentally the setup is guys go out on a competition hunt with a judge. It may be a hunting judge or maybe one that doesn't have a dog in the cast. But anyway, in the course of this 1 or 2 hour hunt, there are provisions to question decisions that are made. And those questions, then there's a further procedure that the questions come back to the hunt director or the master of hounds for a decision. And then there can be an appeal to that in some cases that we call a formal complaint. Am I right so far, Alan?
Yeah, you're spot on.
Okay. So this is what we're talking about for you guys out there who may have never attended a competition hunt. And so there is procedures in place to handle questions that come up. But the buck ultimately stops on your desk, Alan, correct?
Yeah, it does. When somebody files an appeal, that's when the situation is still considered pending, and then, we make the final ruling on it there.
Right.
So, yeah.
One thing that I would interject here, and correct me if I'm wrong, but coming in on Saturday morning or calling UKC on Monday morning about something that happened in a cast over the weekend and you didn't follow the procedure, sorry. That procedure is put in place for a reason. So recently there was a post on social media about, cheating and different things like that. And I stick to my thoughts that if you don't follow the procedure, you got to challenge that if in the field, and you've got to follow that procedure, or there's not a whole lot that you can do. Is that right, Alan?
Well, there is, usually the way I explain it to him is, we have rules in place, procedures in place, and those procedures are there for a reason, and good reason, for everybody involved, for the be it the handler, the officials, and ultimately us as well, But guess what? My hands in making a decision on an appeal, I'm bound by the same rules as written as everybody else, So if you don't follow those procedures, regardless of what I think whether the situation was ruled correctly or incorrectly is kind of a moot point. You know, if you don't follow these procedures to where I can make a ruling on it, then my hands are bound by that same rule. You know, always go back to the one rule we have, and that says situation is not questioned and notated at the time the decision is made, will not be considered. And that kind of applies to the master hounds at an event, you know, but it follows all the way through, you know, so yeah, and there's good reason for that, you know, and I always think, you know, whoever was involved with coming up with those procedures, I feel like they really hit the nail on the head with some of those rules like that, you know. Now I know it's, you know, guys get frustrated sometimes and you know, that something was done incorrectly or whatever, didn't follow the procedures, and they get frustrated with UKC or officials or whatever, and that they can't get it right, you know. But you know, otherwise, I just feel like if we didn't have those written rules in place like that, or those procedures, and we didn't stick with them, we could really open ourselves up for a can of worms, I guess. It would just be a circus, I guess, so to speak. In other words, it's not going to work well if Monday morning I get a call from last year's, and a situation that happened at last year's Autumn Oaks, you know. There's been a lot of water under the bridge since then. It just wouldn't work well, I guess. So yeah, those procedures are in place, and I feel like for very good reason. And I think some of us in position of, be it a master hounds or otherwise, you know, it's our hands are bound by those rules, and I feel like it's a good thing, you know.
Well, so what I'm hearing you saying is, if you don't like the procedure, you can blame Steve Fielder.
Yeah.
No. Well, it is rewarding to look at some of those procedures and know that I was in the room when they were made. But hey, things have changed a lot, and you mentioned this to me not too long ago, Alan, in a discussion we had. That, you know, things are different now. Things are not the same as they were when I was there. Everything moves forward, and times change, and we live in this instant gratification thing where people know everything instantly, you know, and there's a lot of bad information out there that travels at warp speed that I didn't have to deal with back in my time. I can remember when Fred Miller said, and for those of you who don't know who Fred was, he was the owner of UKC at the time I worked there. He said, "We're not getting into this email thing. We're not doing it because it'll take all of our time just answering those darn emails." So you know how things have changed over the years. But hey, listen, you do a lot of travel, don't you?
Yeah, I do quite a bit. Yeah.
Yeah. How many weekends do you think you're on the road a year?
Well, usually at least between 20 and 25. You know, and that includes, you know, some of the beagle trials. I don't think a lot of people, the coonhound folks anyways, don't realize that, you know, that I go to a bunch of those as well. So those are included. So yeah, about between 20 and 25, you know, and that's basically from January till the middle of October. So yeah.
Yeah. You know, some of my best memories, and some of them maybe not so good, in the days that I was at UKC, we had motorhomes. You know, I think there was like three different ones. Fred loved those Winnebago Chieftains. And,
you had an old green one, didn't you, back in those days?
Well, we had some, there were three different ones that I remember driving and over the years. And there was kind of a protocol, you know, we'd leave out maybe on a early Friday morning or maybe on a Thursday. Back then it was mostly Friday and Saturday events. And we'd go stock up the thing with grub, and you know, we would go out and we'd drive 2 hours each, and then while we weren't driving, we could make a sandwich or take a nap or whatever. But you have any interesting stories from the road out there that you could share with our audience?
Well, I don't know as far as motorhomes go. You know, when I first started, Wayne Cavanaugh was the president up there, so that was after Fred Miller, obviously. But and he had a motorhome. Now the one he had was was pretty extravagant, and it was yeah, it was nice to travel with, I guess, sometimes, but it was almost too big and almost not practical, you know, for the most part. But I don't know, as far as traveling with motorhomes, I guess one that stands out to me was when the World Finals was in Rogersville, Tennessee. Nice place up there on the hill, kind of an open-sided facility building, a headquarters building that we had. We've got this motorhome parked there on the side. Actually, that wasn't the big motorhome. We had one that was like a I forget what you call it. It's more of a Jetstream type of vehicle. Looks like a FedEx truck, a smaller one, but it's we called it the Silver Bullet is what we called it. But it was an RV, and we had just gotten that I don't know, a month or so before this world hunt. But so I'm there in the headquarters building, and this thing is parked on the side, and like you said, Wayne's in there making a sandwich or whatever, and I see smoke rolling out of this thing. And I run down there. He actually yells at me, and I look over, and there's smoke rolling out of this thing. And it turns out that he was making a sandwich on the stovetop, and the microwave was right underneath there, and he just bumped and hit the on switch on the microwave. Still had all the plastic and the styrofoam and everything inside this microwave. and we got everything out, but holy cow, it was we thought we were going to burn the motorhome down and who knows what else. But yeah, that was one of the other one was we had this same one. I think it was the following year, maybe, when the Winter Classic was still in Albany. So Wayne and Todd and I would, for a couple of years there, make the trip down to Albany with the motorhome. We'd leave, you know, like on a Tuesday or whatever, and we'd try to make our first stop in Nashville. And, you know, Wayne and Todd, they're kind of into the music scene a little bit as well. But we had our guitars along and went down to Music Row on the first night and left our trailer with all our supplies hooked to the motorhome, had it parked outside the hotel there. Went down on Music Row and everything the night before, and the next morning I was to get the motorhome started, get it warmed up and everything while everybody's getting ready. So I go outside. No motorhome, gone, absolutely not there. Trailer, nothing. So right away I go in and we call the sheriff's department, police department, what have you, and they kind of thought, you know, like most people that go down there spend the night before out on Music Row, we park somewhere we don't remember or whatever. And I was like, no.
Why could that have been?
They did. Long story short, it did get broke into. We had an extra set of keys in the glove compartment, and they took off with that trailer and everything. But they found it about 7 blocks from there, just ransacked. They took all our laptops for the hunt that were in the motorhome part of it. Took our 3 guitars we had in there and tore the TV off the wall in the back, and just they ransacked that thing. But yeah, never did get our stuff back, but we were a little worried with, you know, here we've got our Winter Classic to put on. We don't have our laptops with all our hunt information on it. So that was kind of a goat rope for a little while or whatever, but we got everything we needed and the hunt went off well. But so, yeah, those are a couple of motorhome trips that kind of stand out for me.
I don't have one quite that exciting, but I remember one that Fred, we were at Jasper, Indiana for the 25th anniversary of Autumn Oaks. And Fred had the motorhome set up out there with the air conditioning going. And of course, Labor Day weekend can get really hot down in southern Indiana. And I guess someone just didn't like the idea of sitting in the motorhome with the air going, so they cut the extension cord in 2.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Instead of just stealing the cord, they just I often wondered if they felt a jolt when they cut that thing in 2. But anyway, that's funny stuff.
Yeah, so, you know, you obviously go to a lot of different events and this and that, you know, but as far as, you know, other events that kind of stand out to me just for no other reason other than just that I really enjoyed was, and I like all of them. You know, sometimes, you know, you're on the road so much, I'm like most other guys my age, you know, but you have things going on at home, and sometimes those things take a back seat, you know, and there's things you really need to get done, or other places, you know, your family or whatever has things going that you kind of lose out on a little bit, I guess. But there was one trip I made early, I want to say it was probably 2006-ish maybe. Went to California. We had a club or two out there in California. So I just kind of picked a date, and it happened that the club was out there was going to have a tree and walker sectional. So I went out there on that trip, and that was another one that was very memorable to me. It was just different. And I guess I'm kind of one of those guys that kind of, I don't know, I like different events, unique events. I guess what I'm saying, if they were all the same, they would probably get a little bit boring, I guess, maybe sometimes. But that was one of those, just a total different scenery. And the club I went to was north of Sacramento, you know, and I'd never been to California before that, but I remember flying in and seeing all the water below. You know, it looked like everything was flooded, but turned out they were rice fields. And that's the kind of stuff that they actually hunted in out there, you know, and I went early in the week and pleasure hunted with some of those guys out there. But so we hunted those rice fields, and one of the things that was big out there in their area is they have a lot of the Ducks Unlimited has some places out there, you know, with
wetland set asides.
Yeah, wetlands, yeah. So that's the type of stuff that we hunted, you know, and it was kind of interesting. They had those. One thing I always remembered was they had a lot of tules. If you guys know what that is, looks like I'm not sure what we would call them back home here, but I hunted in that stuff, and it was just different. And you know, going to the club, it was you know, it was hot and dry there and everything, but it was just weird that far west, see a big old UKC sign out there at the end of the driveway, and pull in there, and there goes a jackrabbit, you know, and just different, you know. They're just hey, they have the same love for the sport and everything, but everything's just different, you know. And sitting around the club and just talking with those people, and we had some rules discussion stuff while I was out there. But you could see the Sierra Nevadas, you know, right from the club there. It was just a total different atmosphere, and that was still also one of my highlight events. That you know, it was just a regular club event, but it was just interesting, you know, to go out there and get to know some of those folks. Tiny Santana, I'm sure Steve probably knows him.
Sure.
Some of those guys that ran that club. Yeah, good
one
stuff.
One of the things that we get as we talk to people from all over the country, but our Western hunters seems to be, and I'm going to put you on the spot here, Alan, so pull up your big boy pants on this one.
Sure.
We are looking to interview people in the West, and we always talk to them about their dogs, and it seems that there's a drastic downturn in interest for UKC-registered dogs in the West. And, of course, Steve and I, being from the East, we're very much into the registry part. And for me, you know, I've competition hunted quite a bit in my hunting career, but I'm starting to change my priorities a little bit. So the value to me with UKC is it's real easy for me to pay UKC to keep track of my dog's pedigree and lineage. So can you address that a little bit, or have you put any thought into why there has been a drop-off in interest for UKC-registered hounds and events west? I wouldn't say west of the Mississippi. I think you're going to have to go past Missouri, Kansas, some places like that, but you get farther west, and it seems like there's a real downturn in the interest for UKC out there.
Yeah, I think you're right. You know, a lot of the things that are bigger out there is, you know, they don't have the coon like we do out east, you know, so they do a lot of field trial stuff, things like that, you know, on big game scent. But I think a lot of those guys cross up their dogs, you know, and as far as breeding goes, so a lot of them with our registration rules might not be able to be UKC registered. And I think their field trials, a lot of the field trials they have out there, they'll get a lot more entries of dogs that are not registered versus the licensed trials, for UKC registered dogs. But I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the first podcasts you guys did that I listened to was with the I'd have to go back. I forget his name now.
Ross Feenstra.
Yeah, and you guys talked about that a little bit, and it really made me think where we're probably not communicating or not getting connected enough with those guys, is that it became apparent just listening to him talking, that he's not even aware of our crossbred stuff that we have now, that we've really not reached out to those guys, and it's kind of that we probably should have, and they know very little about it. We've really not reached out to them about that, and before, I think the way our registration rules were, we just couldn't register a lot of their dogs for one, but yeah,
well, I think
it definitely got my attention listening to him talk about some of that stuff.
They're still dipping into, the abundance of hounds back east. For guys out west, they probably don't even fathom how many hounds are back here. But I do know that several hounds from the east make their way west every year, either as pups or young dogs or something like that. So
yeah,
but it just seems like there's no interest in or limited. I'm not going to say no, limited interest, or at least a decreasing interest in getting those hounds registered and keeping that lineage there with UKC.
I think if I can jump in here, Chris, on this, I think it hinges upon the events, and I think Allen mentioned that earlier. There's no doubt that the registry, UKC particularly, which I'll go out on a limb here, is really the registry for anyone that's seriously interested in animal husbandry and keeping record of generations of dogs. But I think the events that happened after World War II certainly created the need for a registry, because it was a ticket. You had to have the registration certificate to play the game. And that, it built on that. And out west, they really haven't had those kinds of events. I just interviewed a guy named Jared Higgins out in Utah, and for Bear Hunting Magazine, and we're doing an article on his Thunder dog that was a tremendous bear dog. And Thunder was a crossbred Walker Blue Tick. And Jared told me that he had 20 generations of, 20 years of breeding with only one outcross in that time on these dogs, but they're not purebred dogs. And they certainly would qualify for the crossbred program that UKC has. But I think the idea is that, there's really no incentive for them to register outside of having, as Chris said, a record-keeping facility. Or and I'm struggling for words there, but the point being that some of those breeders have kept records on their dogs, and they certainly would qualify. Am I wrong? For the crossbred program.
No, you're exactly right. They absolutely would, and that's why I said, just listening to you guys' podcast there with him, just really kind of got my attention. That is, hey, we've not probably reached out to them to offer them or let them know that we do offer the crossbred thing now or whatever. And I don't know, but I think it's like you said, is they do tend to kind of keep the same lines for years and years with very few outcross. This bear hunting trip I went on, he does outfit with dogs as well. But the terrain out there is so steep. He said, a lot of guys that sign up for hunting with a bear hunt with dogs is generally that lasts about a day or two, and they resort to sitting on a bait site. And I can tell why I would be one of those guys. But here again, this outfitter had some hounds out there too, about 5 or 6 around there. But and he said the same thing. You know, his line comes. He's a 4th generation outfitter out there, and he was talking about the same things. You know, these dogs he's got now come from the same line that his grandfather had. You know, started with. And yeah, he did tell me the first time I talked to him on the phone. You know, he knew what UKC was. He said he used to register his dogs with them, and till he kind of figured out is that all Fred Miller wanted was his $20. You know, so other than that, it didn't do him a lot of good.
Well, let me throw something in here. Let me throw something in here, and I'll expect some royalties back on this. But you remember, you remember a few years ago, Alan. I think you and I were discussing setting up either a hunt test or similar to our night hunt game back here, but for our big game houndsmen, where they could receive different certifications, develop a set of rules, and it's a wild hunt. You've got strike, you've got all kinds of different things that you could throw in there, but set up a program for the big game houndsman where you could have a big game hound certification, big game hound elite certification, things like that. Do you remember that conversation?
I do. I don't know if it was the one we had at Plot Days, but I do. You know, I was very interested in entertaining any ideas like that. You know, it's for me, I'm not that guy to not having the experience with big game hunting or whatever, but definitely would interested in a scoring system of such, to evaluate dogs, big game dogs like that, but just seemed like it never really got off the ground as far as coming up with something that would work, but and still interested. And the same goes for I talked to several of the guys at like Plot Days with some of the big game, like the bear bays or the bear bays and things like that, but
well, I think we were
just not really got anything on my table to really take a good look at.
Yeah, I think that conversation came up in the wake of the mess with the bear bays down there in South Carolina, and the fire that those were drawing is when we started having the conversation. But I know we've got listeners in here. We've got some pretty critical thinkers that are listening to our podcast, and I'm not the guy either. I think we need to maybe provoke some thought for those Western houndsmen that want to be able to put a certification on their pack or individual dogs or whatever out there that do know where they're hunting. They do understand the game. And if I'm hearing you right, UKC is open to proposals from, and I'll throw out a name here, Jonathan Lesperance. I mean, that guy's he's got a big brain. He's a critical thinker. And he's very heavily involved in the Nevada organization out there. And Ross Feenstra is another one. So I think there are people out there that could assist in this. We just need to maybe channel the energy or give them some options or plant the seed and let them help you develop something like that.
Alan, how do they contact you at UKC if they have ideas along this line? And I know what you're saying is true. This has been bandied around for many years. It was when I was there and with the other registries that I worked with. I know some guys in North Carolina were working on some kind of a scent system for the field trials. I think that was Clint Pace and some of those guys down there. But how do they contact you at UKC with this kind of information or suggestions? Or maybe they've got a plan that they've worked at and it's sitting on the shelf there, and they can send it along to you.
Yeah, either obviously different avenues. A call is obviously one, but email or call me. But yeah, it's something that has always interested me. Different things like that. I've always been that guy. Growing up on the farm, we actually had stock dogs. And dogs that do stuff. And even those stock dogs, the cattle dogs, interested me just in the way they worked, and the same way goes with big game dogs, and things like that. But yeah, I have a huge interest in that, and anything like that, to kind of evaluate dogs in that manner. But just call the regular office number, ask for me or whatever, or shoot me an email or anything like that. My email is kind of plastered over our website, different places on the forum. You can look at my name there, and has a click on the name. Usually takes me right to my email address. But yeah, not that hard, but certainly interested in entertaining any such ideas. About the only one that we have is, like we mentioned, is field trials just on drag scent or whatever, be it big game or otherwise. But that's about the only thing we kind of have in terms of evaluating big game dogs, I guess, so to speak. And, up to now, it's been only for those that are actually UKC-registered,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It would be interesting. I really think it would be interesting to come up with something like that. And like I said, I'm not that guy either with not having the experience, but I'm sure there's guys that are out there that could really, probably come up with something. I know it's easy to, don't need a set of rules. If you go out just for coon hunting, for instance, you hunt from dark to daylight. The next morning, which one was the best dog that night for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time, and I'd say there'd be interesting. It's interesting stuff for sure.
Well, that website would be www.ukcdogs.com. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and they can chase you down there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh.
Right. Hey, listen, you have Autumn Oaks coming up. Chris, I apologize if I jumped in. You have something else before we...
That's where I was going. We've been generating a ton. I'm getting messages about Autumn Oaks. We've mentioned it a couple times. A lot of interest and excitement from Western houndsmen that want more information on Autumn Oaks, to the point where they don't even know how to pronounce the name of it at this point. So I get all kinds of variations in the names, and maybe it's not coming out clear on the podcast, but it's autumn, like the fall, and then oaks, like the tree, Autumn Oaks, and generating a lot of interest on that, Alan. So, Steve, I was just going to tee that up for you. Run with it.
Well, really, just a little bit of history for our listeners. Autumn Oaks has been the, how shall we say, signature event for the United Kennel Club for many years, dating back to 1960, and where it... I think for 3 years there, it was in Greencastle, Paducah, Kentucky, and even Kalamazoo, Michigan. And then it settled in Greencastle, Indiana for a 20-year run. And then it bounced around up in Michigan and down in North Carolina, finally settled back in Indiana. Alan, I had many good years and great times with Autumn Oaks, and I'm sure you have. And I... when I go now and I look at it and I look at the scope of the thing and see all the improvements that you guys have made, it's just phenomenal. You and Kellum and all the people at UKC have done a super job with it. But tell our listeners a little bit about it. What is it, and what can they expect there this year?
Yeah, it's kind of been dubbed as the granddaddy event, of the year each year, and it happens on Labor Day weekend every year is the date of it. So this year it falls on the last weekend of August, but it's always geared around Labor Day. But yeah, it's I don't know, to me, and I always felt that way before I worked up there. It was just so much more than a coonhound event. It's like a grand reunion of all the different breeds, and one of those where a hunter or a hound enthusiast can come, even if you're not hunting a dog. There's just everything there, a lot of the big breeders are there, a lot of the stud dogs and supplies, just everything. It's like it's the granddaddy event, and it's basically a three day event, kind of kicks off on Thursday. Used to be, I think back in your day, it was just kind of a Friday, Saturday thing, but we've kind of kicked it off with a Thursday deal, and the other thing that we've done, when I first started, they had a lot of guys come up there early for it. You'll have people coming in on Sunday,
right,
the Sunday before already to camp out and, you know, waiting for the gates to open, and those lines there just still amaze me how people line up to come in that early, get a good spot to camp all week and everything. But for a lot of folks, it's their annual vacation. You know, they kind of schedule their vacation around that event. But yeah, so what I was getting at, we've added some licensed hunts throughout the week, like little warm-up hunts. You know, it's back in the day, at one time, you'd get a lot of these out-of-state hunters that would come up there, and they'd want to go hunting a little bit with their dogs, you know, before Friday rolls around. And you know, a lot of them, I say a lot of them, some of them didn't have license, weren't exactly legal, you know, and things like that. And that's not good for us as a registry. You know, we don't want to, you know, we want to work with conservation and follow our game laws and all that. They're all obviously there for a reason. And so what we started doing is having these little licensed warm-up hunts, and they've worked out so well for a lot of people like that, you know, and make sure everybody's legal and gives them a legal avenue to more of an organized avenue for them to go get their dogs warmed up. Obviously, there's some most of those are what we call slam events, where they pay out money instead of trophies or whatever. And we got some added purse stuff, but yeah, just basically the whole week of Autumn Oaks, there's something going on there, you know. So yeah, it's a fun deal, a good deal, and it's still a good event. And quite frankly, you know, it's that one, and we have several events obviously, but it's one of those events for us as UKC, our staff and all that. We obviously talk to so many people on the phones and everything, but that's one of those events where you can get out and be one-on-one with your customers and those that support you. And it's just a good thing. I always enjoy it. It's just a good event. And yeah, any of your listeners, I'd definitely, if you've never been, put that on your calendar and come out to Autumn Oaks sometime.
And where is that, Alan? Where is that?
It's in Richmond, Indiana, which is right on it's on the eastern side of the Indiana line, right on the Ohio line, just right off of Interstate 70. So it's about an hour east of Indianapolis, Indiana, just right off the highway or US 70.
That's at the Wayne County Fairgrounds, right?
It is, yeah. Big fairgrounds. We got a nice facility there, you know, vendors, lots of vendors, 40 plus vendors, I think. And yeah, it's a nice facility. Have the Raper Center's our headquarters building. It's a climate controlled building. So yeah, it's a big deal every year.
Well, Chris and I are going to be there with Houndsman XP. I think we discussed that with you earlier, Alan, and we really appreciate the opportunity to come and to hopefully we're going to do some live podcasting from the event and to kind of get some of that excitement, you know, out there to our listeners.
Yeah, that's good. But you mentioned some of the things that have changed there from Autumn Oaks. Probably one of the biggest things that I've been involved with was, you know, there's a lot of emphasis put on our highest title or degree, which is the Grand Champions. In this case, in the shows, the Grand Champions and the Grand Night Champions. You know, winning that event gives them another title, which is the National Grand Night Champion or whatever. But is the Grand 16 in the Grand Division, and that has just worked out so well, been so well supported. And, you know, before you would simply have the highest scoring dog in that division was your overall champion. And, you know, the hunting is good there. It's, you know, the hunting is very good, and it's not uncommon to have some very good scores, you know, but there's a lot of guys, I think, that were kind of the consensus that they can't really compete with some of those big scores. So when we adopted the Grand 16 format for it, where those grands all hunt on Friday night, all of them do, and then you take the top 16 scores and they go back out in kind of an elimination event to determine your national grand as well as your national breed winner, which that's a pretty big deal, you know, for all the breeds, just to be the national grand knight of Autumn Oaks each year. You know, you kind of you know, you kind of stand out, I guess, as far as recognition goes for breeders or handlers, owners, what have you. But so that's been very well supported. And the thing that I really like about this Grand 16, it gives hunters feel like they have an opportunity, because generally, you know, the lowest score to get in that top 16 is generally a very reasonable score, you know, somewhere between 400 and 500 generally. And I like that. You know, it gives hunters they feel like they do have a chance. You know, if you go out and score on one coon, you're probably not going to get in, but if you can get in on a couple coon, there's a good chance you can get in to move on. So I think, you know, from the first year we had that, our grand division, we were having about 30 casts, you know, so about 30 grand nights. And once we implemented this, that entry number has just doubled in size quickly, and it has pretty much remained there. So now we hunt anywhere between 60 and 70 casts of grand nights every year at Autumn Oaks.
Right. And Alan, I want to kind of digress back to a point we were talking about. I told you to put your big boy pants on. I'll put them on now too.
Yeah.
With your comment about conservation and coming up here and hunting without a license, you know, 15 years ago, probably longer, 20 years ago, we realized, you know, being in that arena as a conservation officer, we realized that people were coming up here and hunting, and I'm not going to make any bones about it. They were hunting illegally.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of effort, and some of it I organized on my part to make sure we're showing up as officers, showing up at Autumn Oaks, letting people see our face, be on the grounds there, but try to educate people on the importance of buying that license. A 5-day non-resident hunting license is $31. Okay, think about that. $31 for 5 days of you being able to come to Autumn Oaks. You're putting something back into the sport. And if we could get people to realize that you spend more on chew that week than you're going to on your license, for $31, I don't know where you could go and get that much bang for your buck as you are when you're paying $31. And the other flip side of that sometimes escapes us is when our hunters show up and we see a spike, because there are people in Indianapolis that keep track of these sort of things. If we would see a spike in those 5-day non-resident license, that brings so much credibility to our hound hunting community, and that helps when you've got a sport that's so under fire from anti-hunting groups and different things. If you can show that, hey, these guys are conservation oriented, all that money goes back into the resource that they're here enjoying, they're the hunters' dollars pay for wildlife type message, that is so huge for the DNR managers and to be able to use that as ammunition to show that, say, no, these guys are contributors. They aren't here taking, they're contributing. Does that mean everybody's going to show up with a license? Probably not. And that's why they paid me for 28 years. But on the side for the people that are looking at ways to save our sport, man, buy that license. Don't tolerate hunting with people that don't have them, because that's how the deer hunters, duck hunters, some of these other sporting groups are passing us by, is they are very conservation minded. So, you know, don't think you're trying to get, there are people that are working, they put extra shifts on during that time around that area up there. I might be giving away some trade secrets, but daggone it, just spend your $31. You can buy it online and get that license and be legal, but also help this sport, you know, with credibility.
Yeah, you know what, Chris, you're exactly right, and there's a lot to be said there, and I think, you know, comparing back to some of the old days, I think sometimes we always as hunters we're
I guess our game wardens and conservation officers in our area, we need to be working with them. There's so much to be said. There's so much positive to come of that. And I think we've come a long way, or at least in my experience, it seems like we have. You know, and I think you, as far as like in my area, you know, calling Indiana, you know, the North Midwest, I guess, so to speak, you personally have been very influential in that, you know, and forming a relationship, especially in the state of Indiana. You mentioned the Hoosier Tree Dog Alliance that you kind of helped found and everything. That was huge, I think, for that, and just things like that. And you guys being at Autumn Oaks, that's a good thing. We certainly appreciate that, and always always appreciate seeing all those guys there, and you can't stress enough for how the importance of hunters working with the conservation officers in their area, regardless of where they are. You know, never working against them. There's just so much good that can come from it. And in this day and age, like you said, we have even all the more reasons to be working together. And there's some parts of the country, you know, and here again, you're going back to some of our events or our licensed events in some parts where clubs and states. North Carolina is one of those where, you know, on our scorecards that we have that they take out to the field in a competition, they have places on them to note the number of coons seen as well as the number of coons scored on. But just sharing information like that with your conservation in your area, it's things like that we need to be doing more of and working together. I think it would be, you know, it's influential, and our hunters can certainly help a whole lot in that respect, I think. And sometimes I think we don't do enough, and sometimes it's probably just a matter of not getting connected enough either, you know, with the conservation in our areas, you know.
Yeah, we're not the boogeyman. I mean, the reason those guys are showing up there is because it interests them. You know, it's like they're walking into those officers that are walking in there. I can tell you that 20 years ago it was very uncomfortable for one of our officers to walk into a coonhound event or a hound event because they're not familiar with it. If it was a National Wild Turkey Federation, Ducks Unlimited banquet, man, they walked right through the doors. But for them to walk into there surrounded by people that they know probably have a little bit of animosity towards them, I can tell you that they've got good intentions to be there. So embrace it and build that relationship. Steve, we are going.
Well, you know, I think the stigma is kind of, you know, they're for us. They're not against us. They're for us. You know, let's, you know, need to recognize that. You know? Right.
Steve, we're going on 2 hours here. And Alan, did it feel like we've been talking for 2 hours?
No, and I apologize for that.
No, we're not limited to time limits here, and when the conversation's good, we want to let it flow. So, Steve, you got anything we need to hit before we wrap it up?
Alan has been an awesome guest,
no doubt.
You know, I'd just like to ask a short question, Alan, about anything new coming out of Kilgore Road there. Anything that our listeners might be interested in as far as any changes or announcements or anything of that nature?
Well, I don't know. Maybe not really. We have some things in the works that really aren't ready for announcement, but some things we're working on. And a lot of that has to do with progressing, I guess, as far as technology is one of them. You know, but we've made some changes. One of the biggest changes that's in effect for this year is the way we our championship point structure or whatever format, so to speak, is based more on a cast win type format or whatever. We have the double headers now, where a club can have two separate events on the same night, like an early hunt and a late hunt, and some of those have done quite well. But as far as, you know, other new stuff, so to speak, I think we're doing, I've always felt we've been a little behind in keeping up with technology, you know, to make it easier, better for our customers and everybody involved. So those are some of the things we're really working on. And you may remember the system you had back when you worked there. Well, you know what? We've still basically got the same system. So working on updating that kind of stuff, and just being able to offer our customers a lot more than we have in the past. You know, one of the things I'm kind of excited about is you know, just like anything else, you know, with technology, there's so much good that comes with it, you know, and being able to utilize that to make it more customer friendly, I guess. You know, we're probably gearing towards for clubs to be able to confirm their events online, and hopefully ultimately one day, not too far out there, we'll be able to do our event reporting and things like that online as well. We obviously have a lot of meetings about this kind of stuff, you know, and the one thing that came up again, and it's probably way out there, but you know, as far as keeping score and things, everybody has a phone. You know, the conversation came up again about having an app for scorekeeping, you know, during a hunt and things like that, you know. So I don't know, we're working on a lot of stuff like that. So,
I guess
it's a few other things. So, yeah.
Yeah, I guess it's safe to say that you do use email up there, that you're not still following Fred's instructions.
Well, Fred would probably roll over if he knew most of the conversations Todd and I have between ourselves. Todd Kellum, you mentioned him a couple times. He's the vice president up there, and he's kind of my superior, I guess, so to speak. But so we communicate a lot, but Fred would probably say, what, you know, if we told him, you know, he's 2 rooms over from me, but a lot of times we correspond through email right there at the office, which might seem kind of odd, you know. But
well, you know,
that's how things work these days, you know.
Right. Well, you talk about all the changes, and you know, to Fred's credit, he was the guy that moved the UKC into the computer age. You know, when I went to work there in '83 full time, they had just switched over to a system where the clubs could call in and search a date, you know, and the office clerks or whatever you want to call them could get right on there and look it up and determine if another club was within 100 miles and say yes or no on the phone. And that was a giant step forward from the old system of doing everything by mail, you know. So, yeah, well, there's no doubt that UKC's always been the innovator when it comes to hounds. They know it all the way back to 1898 when old Chauncey Bennett decided to do business as the United Kennel Club, and it's been a great run, and certainly wish you guys up there a very, very successful run in the future. I think, as I've said a few times, I'm standing in the checkout line, you know, and I'm probably not going to see a lot of these things come to pass, but I've seen a lot, and I've always been proud of my association with the UKC over the years, and people make a company, and from that standpoint, I think UKC has some of the best. So it's been great. Chris, do you have anything else for our friend Allen?
Well, just be looking forward to some proposals on a big game hound certification. I'm sure we've piqued some interest out there somewhere. So it's been a great conversation. Like I said, when you can get guests like this, that you got, you know, we're not meeting you on the phone. We know you. We've shared a lot of time at big events together, Allen, and I've always appreciated your personality and it's not always been peaches and cream. I mean, I've brought things to you that were challenging, and I've been a challenge. I know that, and so I just always appreciate.
You ought to have to work with him day to day, Allen.
Yeah.
You know? Maybe we'll have a private conversation about that.
Well, no, I would say it's all been, you know, on my part anyway, Chris. It's always been good and always good working with both of you guys. And like, you know, Steve is one of those guys. Obviously, he's made his mark in the sport and especially with the registries and everything, and has done so much for the sport. You know, there probably never will be a guy that has done as much as Steve has over the years that he's been associated with it. So, yeah, that's, you know, certainly give a lot of credit to Steve for everything he's done. And there's a lot of guys like that. But, yeah.
Well, you're absolutely right, Alan. There are a lot of guys out there that have done so much to bring this sport along, and that's what Chris and I, when we decided to go down this road, we wanted to do all that we can to preserve what those guys have started and to build on that and to keep this thing strong for future generations, for those young people like your stepson that you took on the hunt out west. And you know, I got, and I think we're going to talk about this perhaps later, Chris and I, but, you know, I get the emails and I get the messages and on social media of people that say they enjoy this podcast, and many of them are young people, and that's what the mission is of Houndsman XP, is to bring those people into the sport, keep them here, equip them to go on into the future, and when they themselves can mentor somebody else down the road.
Yeah. You're exactly right, and there's a lot in there what you just mentioned, and that's exactly right. You know, if we don't get our young kids involved or whatever, give them that opportunity or open those doors for them when they're knocking or whatever, why we're missing the boat, you know, as far as the future of this sport. But yeah, you're right.
Well, Alan, I'm gonna wrap it up and give Steve the final word here. But again, I really appreciate you coming on, and you just do such a great job of representing UKC and Houndsman in general. So I want to give you some accolades for that, and make sure you tell your podcast junkie coworker Todd Kellum he's got to listen to this one, because this was a good one.
Well, I will do that. And before I go, first I just want to applaud you guys' efforts with this podcast and everything you're doing with it and reaching out to so many different people. And what I really appreciate is the diverse topics you guys are interested in getting out there. And it's such a positive for hunters of all kinds and houndsmen of all kinds. So thank you for what you guys are doing with that. And it also, maybe just in closing, we talked about kids or whatever, and I know they have all kinds of gadgets, Garmin's and all this and that, and the way we coon hunt has kind of changed a whole lot with some of that stuff that comes on. But I would just encourage sometimes, especially the younger generation, that even though you have all these gadgets and everything, sometimes put them in your pocket when you're out there. And, there's so much more to hunting than just looking at that thing. When you're spending too much time with that, you're missing out on a lot of the other things in the elements that you're in, listening to the frogs out there and the crickets and the stars, and laying there listening to a hound and listening to all those things. Don't forget to don't miss out on those things that is in nature and in the elements that we're in, the environments we're in when we're out there hunting with our hounds, So
yep.
Yeah, but thank you guys. Really appreciate it. And it's
no
been
problem,
an honor
Alan.
for me to even be asked to come on here.
Oh, no, it's our pleasure. Steve, you've got the final word.
Chris, I tell you what, I'm a houndsman, so are you, so is our guest today. We love it. We love it because of the hounds. I've got a dear friend over in West Virginia, is one of the hardest hunters I've ever seen in my life. His name is John Harris. And he said this, and it remains true, and it is my creed. Chris, you follow your hound, and I'll follow mine.